So your reaction when you woke up this morning and saw that Paul George was headed to Philly to team up with Embiid and Maxey?
I mean, it's a good move. Primarily, I think you take some of the heat off of Joel Embiid, right? Like it's incredible the last couple of years, even when Maxi was starting to break out, that everybody put all of the pressure on Joel Embiid and only on Joel Embiid. And I know he's dealt with the injuries and all that, but it's like it was just always that close. It always felt like Philly was right there in the mix, but it was always the knee or it was always this, always that. And it feels to me like as we kind of, I think, PJ, age out of the era of the big three, right? Like that kind of line of thinking is going by the wayside now. And I really do think, and I think this is a lot of it is going to be based on what Boston did and finally winning the thing this year. I really like the chemistry of this move. I like Paul George, a guy that can kind of extend the defensive perimeter a little bit for Philly. You're not throwing everything onto Joel Embiid, especially as he gets up there in age and his career. But you've got to, for Paul George, you've got to have a good point guard, I think, that can kind of command traffic in his direction so that Paul George can be that spot up wing, catch and release, or catch and drive off the catch kind of player. And I think that Philly sets him up very, very well for that. When people were saying Paul George to Dallas initially, I didn't hate it, but I didn't know if Paul George's game would work with Luka as well as it works with Maxi. I think those two are kind of bread and butter to each other. And that combination again allows Joel Embiid, who has been exceptional the last couple of years, it allows him to, I think, become an option and not a guy that you can kind of just swell your defense around. I actually really like this fit for Philly and for playoff P.
I think this move for Paul George, quite frankly, Rob Brown, I think he's a fool for doing this. I really do. Because I think he went to the Eastern Conference version of the Los Angeles Clippers. You were just in LA for the last 5 years. You were with Kawhi Leonard. And you know what Kawhi Leonard was great at? Not being available for the postseason. On paper, the Clippers sold us this dream. They told us that when they traded for Kawhi and Paul George in that offseason, that they were going to be the new big duo out west, right? And they were going to compete for championships. They were going to go deep into the playoffs. But year after year, Kawhi Leonard could never stay healthy. So what does he do this offseason, Rob Brown? He teams up with the next superstar in the NBA that doesn't stay healthy for playoff runs. There's no denying how great Embiid is, and I think Maxi's a budding superstar. On paper, I agree with what you said, and I think it's a really good move. But you were just out in LA for 5 years. You were with a team and a player that could not stay healthy, and now you're going to sign with the team and a player that has not proven that he is willing to stay healthy. Rob, there are certain players in the NBA, there are certain teams that we look at when we discuss their futures market. We did this a ton last year with the Miami Dolphins and Tua because we just couldn't trust him to stay healthy. We look at the Pelicans with Zion, we look at the Clippers with Kawhi, and we look at the Sixers with Joel Embiid every single year. And we always say, well, if they stay healthy, if Zion's healthy, New Orleans could be dangerous. If Kawhi stays healthy, the Clippers could be dangerous. And we have this case with Philadelphia every single year. So let me ask you, Rob Brown, real quick. Do you trust Joel Embiid to stay healthy this season for a playoff run? Do you trust him to stay healthy?
I mean, listen, as a aforementioned Pelicans fan, thank you for bringing up that. That sting is still very fresh, PJ. It's much appreciated. I think all you can do is hope and then try to come up with ways to help that become a reality, right?
Your reaction, I know you're a Philadelphia 76ers fan. I'm sure you thought it was a good possibility that Paul George would head to Philadelphia. Now that it is a reality, what is your reaction to PG heading to Philly?
Yeah, it was something that I think actually I was a little bit underwhelmed by sort of before it happened. As someone that just is a huge 76ers fan, I know I wear the Fanatic hat. I'm kind of the baseball season now. I'll get to the Sixers hat later. But it's something that, you bring somebody else in Paul George. He's a perfect fit for this team. Basketball-wise, he can do everything the Sixers need. It's just another guy I'm going to be worrying about his ability to play in April, May, or June. from a big picture perspective, again, perfect fit for Philadelphia. The contract may be a year longer than I want it to be, but Daryl Morey's a great GM. He's going to find a way to get out of this. And I think something really important to note, I haven't had a chance yet to go back and look a couple of years and tie this down, but Paul George is one of the best free agents that's been signed probably this decade, definitely over the last 5 to 10 years. Players this good rarely actually make it to free agency. So it is a big deal for Philadelphia. They get a really great player and they have a nice core. Again, maybe we could find a way to turn the injury switch off this season, but Maxey and Embiid, Paul George, that's a core three that can do just about anything.
Nope, that's Rob Brown. First off, man, great to share some airwaves with you. We talked a little bit about this back in the first hour, and that was kind of the thought that I had, right, is you look at the Pelicans with Zion, you look at the Yankees with Aaron Judge. When you've got an injury-prone athlete, to me, the job of a GM is to figure out how do we minimize the chances of that. Well, Embiid and Paul George out on a wing pulling a defense away from Embiid feels like a good way to at least kind of decrease some of the physicality that people are going to throw at Joel Embiid. And if nothing else, if I can get Paul George out there putting up 20 points a game, now that's 20 less. I have to have Joel Embiid go. To me, it feels like a great move because if nothing else, you are minimizing the amount of stress that you, physical, literal stress that you are putting on the body of Joel Embiid. That's why I love this move.
Makes a lot of sense. I hadn't quite thought about that yet, but you're right. You're bringing someone in who now you can find ways to split time up. I'm curious to see if Nick Nurse is going to design, we'll have Embiid games and Maxey games and Paul George games and things like that. So I think that's a really good point. I've been thinking about finding a backup for Embiid, someone who can just literally take over games and play for him. I do like the addition of Andre Drummond, by the way. Getting him for $5 million a year was great. Grabbing Bona there in the second round, they're trying to do that. But I like what you're saying. Paul George is definitely going to help take some burden off both of those guys.
The Sixers have overtaken the Knicks to win it all. They are 8-1, while New York is 9-1. However, Rob Brown, the Knicks have the lower odds to win the East at plus 375, where Philly is 4-1. What do you make of odds makers giving the Knicks a better chance to win the East, but the Sixers a better chance to win the title? Your thoughts on that?
I mean, to me, the answer is the Knicks to win the East feels like a better bet because the Sixers will have to likely beat one, if not both of them, in coming out of the East to get to a title. So I will say this. I like this Knicks team. Losing Hartenstein is, I think, a bigger blow than Knicks fans think it's going to be, right? Like that's a big chunk of what you were doing last year, was getting the outlet passes off the rebounds, opening up with some fast breaks that allow Jalen Brunson to be electrifying. Listen, I am intrigued by the concept of the Nova Knicks next year, effectively reuniting a national champ. Like, this is going to be really interesting for the people who love to say, oh, well, the best college team would beat an NBA team. First off, no, they would not ever. But it's going to be interesting to see, like, how the chemistry of the Nova boys come together on the floor in Madison Square Garden. But the loss of Hartenstein, I think, is a bigger loss than Knicks fans think it's going to be. But if you asked me what I think it's easier to replace, I'll tell you, like, finding pure rebounders is not easy in today's NBA. There's a lot of 7-footers, but there are very few that, like, can work the glass. I think it's a big loss for the Knicks. But I feel like there's still some guys out there that can be moved around that can replace that easier than you would have replaced any of the other guys that built up the primary three for this Knicks team. I think the Knicks are going to be good. I don't think the Knicks are winning the East because I don't think it doesn't matter who you add. I just think Boston has, by the way, congratulations, Brad Stevens, like GM of the damn decade for what he's done in Boston. I think they built a core that's going to keep Boston head of the class for a long time. This is just, it'll be easier to win the East, then beat Boston, and then turn around and beat whoever comes out of the West. That being said, I don't really like either one of those bets, to be honest, PJ Glasser.
No, I agree with you. And Brad Stevens and Sam Presti, the GM for OKC, they're the two best in the business. And I agree with you on Hartenstein, Rob Brown. Sam Presti doesn't give out deals to anybody. And when he gives Hartenstein 3 years and $87 million, he realizes his value. And in that Dallas series, when OKC played the Mavs, as good as Chet Holmgren is going to be as a pro, they really struggled on the boards, right? Lively and Gafford. I mean, that was one of the big advantages that Dallas had in that series. And now that you get Hartenstein, he's going to be the guy, right? Every team kind of needs that dude who can just like muck it up, right? Like a Steven Adams, a Jonas Valanciunas. Sometimes you just need that big man that's just out there to just get dirty and grab boards. And that's what Hartenstein's going to provide for OKC. And with Presti giving him that much money, I think it's showing how much he values that, especially on a young team like Oklahoma City. Rob, everybody agrees the Thunder is they're coming. Like, there's no question about it. And I think the next step for that team is they need like an enforcer almost. They need a guy who's willing to get dirty, and that's what Hartenstein's going to provide. And that's why right now they are 8-1 to win the NBA Finals. Back to the Knicks and Sixers, though. I agree. If I had to take one of the bets, it would be New York to win the East, going back to what we were talking about last segment about trust and health. And even though the Knicks certainly were beat up with injuries, and I do worry about Tibbs running his team to the ground, I think now with the Bridges trade and adding another key piece to go along will help them. And they shouldn't hopefully be as beat up heading into the postseason, during the postseason, as they were this past year.